Imagine going to jail because you wore the wrong pants or being fined because your house had too many windows. History is littered with legislators who lost their minds, passing laws so absurd the public didn't just complain, they revolted. We've curated the most baffling legal failures that were rightfully thrown into the trash can of history. You are about to witness the absolute peak of bureaucratic stupidity, starting right now. 1. China banned all video game consoles like PlayStation and Xbox for 15 years. From 2000 to 2015, the government claimed these machines would ruin the minds of young people and hurt their ability to work. However, you could still play games on computers and phones, which made the specific ban on consoles completely useless. Gamers were forced to buy consoles on the gray market until the government finally admitted the rule was outdated and let the players play. 2. During the 1920s, wearing a straw hat past September 15th wasn't just a fashion faux pas in New York City, it sparked genuine violence. There was an unwritten rule that straw hats had to vanish by that date, but vigilante mobs took it upon themselves to enforce it, snatching hats off pedestrians and stomping on them. The Straw Hat Riot lasted 8 days and led to multiple arrests, forcing the police to intervene to protect people's right to wear out-of-season headgear without getting punched. 3. King Henry VIII introduced a tax on beards in 1535, which is ironic considering he had a massive beard himself. The tax increased based on your social standing, effectively making facial hair a luxury subscription service. His daughter, Elizabeth I, later reintroduced a tax on any beard with more than 2 weeks of growth. Imagine having to pay a monthly government fee just because you forgot to shave. Would you pay the state to keep your facial hair, or would you go babyface to save money? 4. In 1675, King Charles II of England tried to ban coffee shops because he was incredibly paranoid. He believed that people were gathering in cafes just to talk trash about him and spread fake news. He declared that coffee shops were places for lazy people and ordered them shut down. The public, addicted to their caffeine, went absolutely ballistic. They got so angry that the ban lasted only 11 days before the king had to give up to avoid a riot. If the government took away your morning coffee today, would you start a revolution? 5. When movie theaters first opened, they desperately tried to mimic high-class opera houses, so they strictly banned popcorn. Owners hated the noise of crunching and the mess it made on their fancy carpets. But when the Great Depression hit, theaters realized cheap snacks were the only way to stay profitable. They reversed the ban to save their businesses, and now, watching a movie without a bucket of overpriced corn feels practically illegal. 6. In 1990, the British government introduced the community charge, infamously known as the poll tax. It charged a flat rate for local services regardless of income, meaning a billionaire duke paid the same amount as a struggling student. The public response was explosive, leading to massive riots in London and a nationwide refusal to pay. It was so disastrously unpopular that it led to the Prime Minister's resignation and was repealed shortly after. 7. For decades, New York City enforced the cabaret law, which required musicians to carry a specific identification card to perform in nightclubs. If you had any prior trouble with the law, even minor offenses, your card could be revoked, effectively banning you from your own profession. This was used to target jazz legends like Billie Holiday and Thelonious Monk. It was a petty, bureaucratic way to silence artists, and its repeal was a massive victory for the freedom of music. 8. In the early 18th century, the British button-making industry was struggling, so they successfully lobbied for a law banning cloth buttons. You were legally required to use metal or bone buttons to support the industry. Tailors were actually fined for sewing clothes with matching fabric buttons. It was a classic case of the government micromanaging fashion to save a dying trade. And naturally, everyone ignored it until the law faded away. 9. In 1974, the U.S. imposed a national 55-mile-per-hour speed limit to save fuel during the oil crisis. The result was collective national rage. It turned law-abiding citizens into highway outlaws because literally everyone ignored it. It was so universally hated and impossible to enforce that the federal government finally gave up in 1995, returning speed limit authority to the states. If they brought this back today to save energy, would you actually drive 55 on the highway? 10. In the 1950s, the U.S. Senate held hearings blaming comic books for juvenile delinquency. This panic led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority, a strict set of industry rules that effectively banned horror, gore, and even words like terror or zombies from titles. It strangled the creative industry for decades until publishers realized the code was outdated nonsense. They slowly abandoned it, finally allowing comic books to grow up and tell complex stories again. 11. For 74 years, it was illegal to buy beer in Iceland, even though you could legally buy strong liquor like vodka or whiskey. The government thought beer was too cheap and would make people party too much. It made absolutely no sense, and locals hated it. The ban was finally lifted on March 1, 1989, a day which is now celebrated every year as Beer Day. If the government banned your favorite drink but left everything else, would you move to another country? 12. In 1974, the U.S. government mandated that all new cars must have a system preventing the engine from starting unless the front seat belts were buckled. It sounded safe in theory, but the technology was a disaster. Putting a heavy bag of groceries on the passenger seat would trigger the sensor, leaving drivers stranded in parking lots. The public outcry was so immediate and furious that Congress stripped the mandate less than a year later, proving that you cannot annoy Americans into safety. 13. In 2006, the city of Chicago decided to ban foie gras, a fancy duck liver dish, because of how it is made. But they didn't ban the sale of the actual duck, just the liver. Chefs were furious and started giving it away for free as a side to other dishes to get around the law. The duck police became a joke, and the mayor eventually called the law silly and had it repealed 2 years later because the city had bigger problems to solve than fancy dinners. 14. In 1644, Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans effectively banned Christmas pies in England. They believed that the spices used in mince pies were too exotic and exciting for a holy day, promoting gluttony and sin. Soldiers were actually ordered to search homes and confiscate the delicious pastries. The ban eventually faded with the restoration of the monarchy, proving that you can never truly legislate against a good dessert. 15. The British government once tried to tax men for being fashionable. In 1784, they introduced a hat tax. You had to buy a stamp to paste inside your hat to prove you paid the government. Rich men paid more for expensive hats, and poor men paid less. But people just started wearing cardboard headgear or calling their hats head coverings to avoid the fee. The tax was confusing, easy to fake, and hated by everyone until it was finally removed. 16. King Edward II of England banned soccer, football, in London way back in 1314. He said there was too much noise and hustling over a large ball, which might cause evils. He wanted men to practice archery for war instead of kicking a ball around. The ban was ignored for centuries by peasants who loved the game, and eventually the crown gave up. Imagine if the king could see the packed stadiums today. He would probably faint. 17. In the early 1900s, Australia had very strict rules about swimwear. Men could be fined if their swimsuits were not wide enough or didn't cover enough skin. In 1902, a man named William Gotcher decided to protest by swimming in a prohibited suit at a popular beach. He announced his crime to the newspapers beforehand. The police didn't arrest him, and his stunt helped break the stigma, forcing the laws to change so people could actually swim comfortably. 18. From 1933 to 1974, it was actually illegal for U.S. citizens to own gold bars or coins. President Roosevelt signed an order forcing everyone to sell their gold to the government to help the economy. If you were caught stashing gold in your safe, you could face a huge fine or even prison time. It took 40 years for President Ford to sign a law letting Americans own gold again. Would you hand over your life savings if the president asked nicely? Or would you hide it in the backyard? 19. In the 1970s, South Korea had a fashion police that literally carried rulers. They would stop men on the street to measure their hair. If it was too long, they could be forced to get a haircut on the spot. They also measured women's skirts to make sure they weren't too short. It was a massive invasion of personal style. The younger generation hated it, and the laws were eventually relaxed as the country modernized and realized hair length doesn't cause crime. 20. For decades, California cities had bans on cruising and lowriders. Police could ticket you just for driving slowly in a custom car. It was a law that targeted a specific car culture and community. Enthusiasts fought for years, arguing that their cars were art, not a crime. Finally, in 2024, California signed a bill lifting the ban on cruising statewide, admitting that driving a cool car slowly is a form of expression, not a public threat. 21. In 1366, King Edward III outlawed bowling because his soldiers were spending too much time throwing balls at pins and not enough time practicing archery. He declared the game a distraction from the defense of the realm. It took centuries for the government to realize that you can be a capable soldier and still enjoy a spare. The ban was eventually lifted, allowing bowling leagues to thrive without fear of treason charges. 22. In 2002, Greece wanted to stop illegal gambling machines, but they wrote the law so badly that they accidentally banned all electronic games. This included Game Boys, PlayStation consoles, and even the Snake game on mobile phones. Tourists were actually scared to bring their laptops into the country for fear of arrest. It was a total mess where owning a Mario game made you a criminal. The European Union eventually had to step in and force Greece to fix the law so kids could play without going to jail. 23. New York City tried to ban the sale of large sugary drinks in 2012 because the mayor thought banning big cups would magically stop people from gaining weight. New Yorkers were furious about being treated like toddlers who couldn't be trusted with a cup size. It didn't stop anyone from just buying 2 small sodas instead of 1 big one. The courts eventually struck down the ban, calling it confusing and unfair, forcing the city to accept that people have the right to drink a giant soda if they want to. 24. In 1784, Britain put a tax on bricks to pay for wars, demanding money for every single brick used to build a house. Builders were smart, though. They realized the tax was per brick, not by size, so they started making absolutely giant bricks to pay less tax. Buildings started looking very strange with these huge, ugly blocks. The government finally realized their tax was ruining British architecture and losing money, so they repealed it to stop the madness. 25. In 1908, New York City passed a law making it illegal for women to smoke in public, while men could still puff away wherever they wanted. The mayor actually argued that women's smoking was unladylike and needed to be stopped by force. The only person arrested was a woman named Katie Mulcahy, who refused to pay the fine. The law was so unpopular and obviously sexist that the mayor had to cancel it just 2 weeks later to stop the embarrassment. 26. Alabama banned yoga in public schools for almost 30 years because state leaders decided that stretching was a dangerous religious practice, not exercise. Teachers were legally forbidden from saying namaste or teaching simple poses to stressed-out kids. It wasn't until 2021 that they finally removed the ban, admitting that letting kids stretch in gym class is actually good for their health and probably won't cause a spiritual crisis. 27. Before 1974, banks in America could legally refuse to give a woman a credit card without a man's signature. It did not matter if she had a great job, her own money, and paid all the bills. She still needed a husband or father to sign the paper for her, like a child. The law was finally changed after massive pressure from women who were tired of being treated like they couldn't handle basic math or money. 28. In the 1970s, California banned the use of the short-handled hoe for farm workers. This tool was designed to force workers to stay bent over at the waist all day long to be closer to the crop, which destroyed their backs permanently. Activists fought for years to ban this cruel tool, arguing it was inhumane. They finally won in 1975 forcing farms to use long tools that let people stand up straight while they worked. 29. The UK government tried to tax hot-baked goods in 2012, leading to the pasty tax scandal. The rule was confusing. If a pastry was hot, you paid a tax, but if it was cold, you didn't. Bakeries didn't know if they had to wait for lunch to get cold just to save customers money. The public mocked the government so relentlessly that they were forced to cancel the tax to save face. Do you think the government should be taxing your lunch based on its temperature? 30. Vietnam banned the ownership of hamsters in 2008 because the government claimed the small pets were dangerous and carried strange diseases. You could get a huge fine just for having a hamster in your house. People thought this was ridiculous and continued to buy them secretly on the black market. The ban was eventually dropped because the police realized they had better things to do than raid houses looking for tiny, fluffy rodents. 31. In 1913, the U.S. Post Office introduced parcel post, but they forgot to clarify what parcels actually were. Americans realized it was cheaper to mail their children to grandma than buy a train ticket, so they literally attached stamps to their kids' clothing. One child was mailed 73 miles away for just 53 cents. The Postmaster General had to hurriedly issue a new regulation banning the shipment of humans, forcing parents to actually travel with their kids. Would you mail your child to a relative for 50 cents if it was legal today? 32. In the 1970s, Israel decided that color television was a dangerous luxury that widened the gap between rich and poor. The government actually used special technology to erase the color signal from broadcasts, forcing everyone to watch in black and white. The public responded by buying an inexpensive device called the anti-eraser that restored the color. The government eventually realized they were fighting a losing battle against rainbow technology and finally let the color flow. 33. The European Union became legendary for bureaucratic nonsense when they regulated the curvature of cucumbers. Commission Regulation 1677/88 stated that Class 1 cucumbers had to be practically straight to be sold. It became the global symbol of government overreach, with people furious that perfectly good vegetables were being trashed for being wonky. The EU finally scrapped the rule in 2009 to stop looking ridiculous, admitting that a curved cucumber tastes exactly the same. 34. Until 1993, it was strictly against the rules for women to wear pants on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Female senators were forced to wear dresses or skirts, regardless of the weather or their personal comfort. It wasn't until Senator Barbara Mikulski led a pantsuit rebellion, walking onto the floor in trousers, that the rule was finally broken. It seems wild that the people making the nation's laws were worried about the fabric covering a woman's legs. 35. In 1712, Britain introduced a heavy tax on soap to fund their wars. It was so strict that soap makers were required to sleep in their factories, and tax collectors locked the boiling pans at night to prevent illegal production. As a result, soap became a luxury item for the rich, and the poor simply stopped washing, causing disease to spread. The tax on cleanliness was finally repealed in 1853, allowing the British public to smell decent again. 36. For over 70 years, it was illegal to pump your own gas in Oregon. The state claimed it was a fire hazard and that regular people were too untrained to handle a fuel nozzle. This created a culture where many Oregonians genuinely didn't know how to fill their own tanks. In 2023, the law was finally changed to allow self-service, though many locals were terrified of the pump. If you had to wait for an attendant every time you needed gas, would you lose your mind? 37. In the early 1900s, large hatpins were a fashion staple, but women also started using them as weapons to stab men who harassed them on the street. Terrified city councils in Chicago and other cities passed laws limiting the length of hatpins to prevent women from defending themselves. These hatpin laws were essentially a way to protect creeps from getting poked. As fashion changed and hats became smaller, these bizarre weapon restrictions quietly disappeared from the books. 38. In the 1930s, several U.S. states tried to ban car radios. Legislators argued that listening to music while driving was a dangerous distraction that would cause accidents and lull drivers to sleep. Some proposed fines were massive. The auto industry fought back hard, arguing that radios actually kept drivers awake and alert. The laws were defeated, which is lucky for us. Otherwise, carpool karaoke would be a documented crime. 39. Canada had a law in its criminal code that made it illegal to create or sell comic books that depicted any crime. The law, passed in the 1940s, was technically broad enough to ban Batman or Superman. It was a reaction to the moral panic that comics were corrupting the youth. While it was rarely enforced in modern times, it remained a weird legal trap until it was finally scrubbed from the code in 2018 as an outdated relic. 40. In the 1980s, the leader of Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, banned the board game Scrabble. He didn't like it because he thought it was too intellectual and a subversive evil. He was terrified that people playing word games might start thinking too much or sharing secret codes. It is arguably the pettiest ban in history. The game became legal again immediately after his regime fell, proving that you can't stop people from wanting a triple-word score. 41. Until 2018, the Criminal Code of Canada actually contained a law making it illegal to fraudulently pretend to exercise or to use any kind of witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, or conjuration. Essentially, if you weren't a real wizard, you were a criminal. But the law failed to clarify how a prosecutor would prove someone was a legitimate wizard in court. It was a bizarre legal relic that police actually used to charge people as recently as 2017. The government finally scrubbed it from the books to join the 21st century, realizing that prosecuting fake witches was perhaps not the best use of tax dollars. 42. In 1982, the town of Marshfield, Massachusetts, banned all coin-operated video games because they believed Pac-Man and Donkey Kong would turn the town's youth into gambling addicts and social deviants. For 32 years, arcade games were treated like dangerous contraband, and you had to drive to the next town over just to play Space Invaders. It took a concerted effort by local business owners and a very confused younger generation to finally overturn the ban in 2014, proving that holding a joystick does not actually turn a teenager into a criminal mastermind. 43. Up until 2024, New York State still had a law in the books that made adultery a misdemeanor crime, punishable by up to 3 months in jail. While it was rarely enforced by the police, it remained a bizarre tool for vindictive exes to threaten legal action during messy divorces. It was a remnant of a time when the government felt the need to police the bedroom. The state legislature finally repealed it, deciding that while cheating definitely makes you a bad partner, it shouldn't make you a convict with a criminal record. 44. In the 1920s, Tennessee passed the Butler Act, which made it illegal for any teacher to explain the theory of evolution in a state-funded school. This led to the famous Scopes monkey trial, a global media circus that pitted religious fundamentalism against modern science. The state looked ridiculous on the world stage, yet they stubbornly kept the law until 1967. It serves as a permanent reminder that you can legislate against a textbook, but you cannot legislate against biological facts, no matter how much they annoy you. 45. Switzerland briefly became the laughingstock of the hiking world when the canton of Appenzell had to crack down on naked hiking. While not a nationwide repeal, the legal battle started when locals got tired of seeing nude tourists walking past their family picnic spots. The courts had to step in to clarify that while nature is beautiful, wearing pants is generally preferred by the public. It sparked a massive debate about personal freedom versus public decency, ending with a ruling that hiking boots alone are simply not enough of an outfit. 46. In 2011, France banned ketchup in primary school cafeterias to protect the integrity of French cuisine. The government argued that the American condiment was ruining the taste of traditional food and masking the flavor of the ingredients. They restricted it to being served only with French fries once a week. The ketchup ban was mocked globally as culinary snobbery gone wrong. While strict nutritional rules remain, the intense anti-condiment fervor has largely cooled down, allowing kids to enjoy their lunch without a lecture on gastronomy. 47. The U.S. military enforced a "don't ask, don't tell" policy for 17 years, which forced gay service members to lie about their identity to serve their country. It created a toxic culture of fear and discharged over 13,000 qualified soldiers simply for being who they were, costing the government millions in training. Public opinion shifted massively as people realized how counterproductive it was. The policy was repealed in 2011, allowing troops to serve openly and proving that honesty and integrity are actually the best policies for national defense. 48. In the 19th century, San Francisco had an ordinance known as the Ugly Law, but they also had a specific ban on carrying a lunch bucket on a pole. The city was trying to modernize and thought these old-timey visuals associated with laborers were holding them back from being a world-class metropolis. It was a classic case of a city trying to gentrify its own sidewalks by criminalizing the working class's lunch containers. As the city grew and culture shifted, these petty ordinances were ignored and eventually discarded for being elitist nonsense. 49. Australia's New South Wales government introduced strict lockout laws in 2014 to stop alcohol-fueled violence. It meant you couldn't enter a bar in Sydney after 1:30 a.m. While violence did drop statistically, it completely destroyed the city's nightlife economy and vibrant music scene, turning a global metropolis into a ghost town after dark. After years of public protests and musicians claiming the city was dead, the laws were rolled back in 2020 to help the city get its groove back and save the hospitality industry. All right, we have covered 49 absolute legislative disasters, and there is just one left. But before we hit number 50, it is time for the final verdict. In our opinion, the award for the most baffling rule of the day goes to number 31, the baby mail. Why? Because the fact that parents looked at the U.S. Postal Service and thought, yes, pasting stamps to my toddler's jacket is a perfectly acceptable travel plan, is a level of thriftiness that borders on insanity. It is the ultimate loophole that turned children into cargo. Do you agree with our verdict? Or did the Straw Hat riots at number 2 deserve the crown for sheer violence over fashion? Let us know your pick in the comments. And now, our final number. 50. For decades, it was illegal in the United Kingdom to insult someone under Section 5 of the Public Order Act. The law outlawed threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behavior. The problem was that insulting is subjective. Police used it to arrest people for making jokes, criticizing religion, or even just being annoying. Comedian Rowan Atkinson led a massive campaign to reform the law, arguing that the right to offend is a key part of free speech. The government finally removed the word insulting from the law in 2013, admitting that being rude shouldn't be a crime. We've just survived a tour through history's most embarrassing legal failures, proving that just because it's a law doesn't mean it's smart. Now, I have a question for you. If you could make one petty annoyance illegal instantly, like people who chew with their mouth open or slow walkers, what would you ban? Drop your new law in the comments below. If you enjoyed watching bureaucracy fail, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.